Auburn versus LSU. That's all you need to say, and it speaks for itself. The wild and sometimes confounding nature of this annual football matchup in the SEC never fails to entertain. A peculiar fact of the rivalry is that Auburn has had a losing streak since 1999. Let's look back at some of the facts, stats, and weird things that have occurred in that time frame. My name is Kyle, the owner and editor of the E2C network, where the Auburn family speaks. Our content here and on our podcast network may tend to be Auburn sports heavy, but if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell so you never miss any content. Thank you to members of our booster club like John Stokes, who help produce videos like this. So right up front, I want to mention that if you're watching this after or before the 2021 Auburn versus LSU matchup, which is about to take place, there's still some relevance to this. Obviously, if you're watching this before, which will be the majority of you, going to put things into context why this is such an important matchup. After the fact, if you're watching this, you'll kind of already obviously know what's happened in this game, and maybe it can kind of enrich the experience so far if the streak is continuing or if Auburn has finally snapped the streak. Now, there's going to be a lot of things in here that are somewhat anecdotal on my part because this has been a big part of my Auburn football history in terms of my fandom. I literally grew up during this time, and most of my adolescence, obviously, into early and now middle adulthood. Yes, I'm that old. You can make your jokes now. But I'll do my best to be as accurate as possible about the portrayal of these games. And so LSU fans, if you're listening to this, please just be forewarned here that this is obviously coming from an Auburn fan perspective, and I'll try to be as respectful as you can be to LSU fans as possible. If we're going to appreciate the losing streak that has happened since 1999, we actually have to start at the 1999 football game, affectionately known to Auburn fans as the cigar game. Now, affectionately meaning it was great then, but now we kind of look at it as like, did we really need that if it resulted in all this? Basically what happened is Auburn blew out LSU in Baton Rouge 41-7 on Coach Tommy Tuberville's birthday. And this was a rare day game in Baton Rouge at the time. So what happened after the game, after we'll call it a shellacking of the LSU Tigers, Auburn players and coaches smoked cigars on the field, and it sparked a new intensity for this rival, which has only grown with each year. So since that pivotal game, there have been 10 games. All of those games obviously on odd numbered years, as the rotation is you trade back and forth who is the home team. In that time, in my estimation, in my opinion, there have been only 4 legitimate close games that Auburn could have won: 2005, 2007, 2017, and 2019, which is odd to talk about, and we'll get there in just a little bit. In that time, Auburn has been ranked in 7 of the games, and LSU has been ranked in 8, which goes to speak to how pivotal this game is, not just in the SEC every year, but also on the college football entirety of its landscape. This is a pivotal, huge matchup. Now, of course, there have been off years. There's even, I think, 1 or 2 where neither team was ranked, but most of the time you can see that someone is ranked, if not both of the teams. Also during this time, let's talk about head coaches. Both teams have seen 4 head coaches. LSU has had Jerry DiNardo, Nick Saban, Les Miles, and now Ed Orgeron. Les Miles was also fired during this time right after a different Auburn game, which was in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Obviously not relevant to this, but I just thought it was interesting to note because there's also the opinion, obviously if you're watching the future, you know about this already if it has happened, but Ed Orgeron is kind of on the hot seat, and there are some people saying that if he loses to Auburn, it might not be a good year for him. For Auburn, Tommy Tuberville, Gene Chizik, Gus Malzahn, and now Brian Harsin. So that gives you a look at some of the stats and figures behind this 2 decades of losing for Auburn and LSU. Let's talk about the games. Now, I'm going to hit on some of these in more details than others because there's just more interesting things in some of them. But as I was writing these down and just kind of going through them myself, it's amazing how many different storylines and things that have happened. And we're going to talk about the first one right after the cigar game in Baton Rouge. 2001, LSU would eventually win 27-14. But the interesting thing behind this game, because sadly this was the season that was affected by the events of 9/11, having an entire week of games pushed back to the first week of December. Auburn decided it was a smart idea to continue their antics of the cigar game into this particular game by stomping on LSU's Tiger Eyes, which is not something that you do. In fact, it may have been the first time someone even tried to attempt to do that. This was also going to be a conference championship play-in game for the divisions, as Florida and Tennessee were playing for their side, and LSU and Auburn were playing for the other side. This was also going to be Nick Saban's first home game against Auburn in Baton Rouge, and obviously it was a good result for them with Auburn and their antics again, and LSU gets the win 27-14. 2003, 31-7, LSU. Not really much to say there because this was the season that Auburn was suspected to win it all. They were ranked number 1 by several publications. The sad part about it is LSU actually went on to be the national champs under Nick Saban during this season. In 2005, 20-17 LSU, but in overtime, one of the legitimate opportunities for Auburn to break the streak, or to really keep it from becoming a streak at all. This was a follow-up to the championship year for Auburn, where they ended up having a pretty good year. Only LSU and Georgia Tech losses for them, so you can understand why this was such a close game. This was actually two very good teams together. 2007, and this is the one I'm going to park for just a second and have a personal conversation with you about. 30-24 to LSU, and I'm getting a headache right now just even thinking about it, and that is because of Flynn to Bird. A last-second touchdown, which was a fade to the back of the end zone. Let me give you some more context for this. There was a timeout left with time literally running down, and we all assumed that Les Miles, the then head coach, was just going to let the clock run down to set his kicker up for a last-second field goal, which was going to be a pretty easy attempt for a college kicker. But no, as the time started winding down, it looked like he was going to have some miscues on what they were actually going to do, and then they hike the ball, and then they throw that bomb up there, and in classic Les Miles fashion, somehow, someway, gets the win over Auburn, and they eventually become the LSU national champs. Now, this game for me was during my college years, and I will never, ever forget where I was, when it was. I can remember the smells, the people that were there, my then girlfriend at the time. As that ball comes down and I realize it's caught, I just fall to my knees and fall flat on my face on the floor, and literally, I'm not even joking, no hyperbole whatsoever, for 30 minutes, just lay there in sorrow. 2009, 31-10 LSU. This was Gene Chizik's first year as head coach, still trying to figure some things out at the time. 2011, 45-10 LSU. Really not much to talk about there. It was a little bit disappointing year for Auburn after a follow-up year on the national championship they had just had. 2013, things start to get really interesting during the Gus Malzahn era. 35-21 LSU wins, but Auburn made a valiant effort after giving up a humongous lead to LSU on the road, but they fought and clawed their way back, and had an onside kick gone Auburn's way, I think we're talking about a different game, not necessarily win, but one of those moments and one of those games you can point to where Auburn probably could have ended the streak right there. The interesting thing about this is this would spark the national championship run for Auburn and their 11-1 overall record in the regular season, on the road to the SEC championship, and eventually, sadly, the loss to Florida State in the national championship game. But what a spark it was for the Tigers, the good Tigers, during that season. 2005, this is not a fun one, 45-21 LSU. Leonard Fournette powers LSU with a career-high 228 yards and 3 touchdowns. This is what I call the Olay game, because I will always remember Trey Matthews, the UGA transfer who was a safety for us, come running over to make what I thought was an assured tackle on the sideline, but instead decided to go up high at his shoulder pads to take the tackle, and ended up just spinning around and going out of bounds himself without Leonard Fournette, who continued on to a touchdown. He was every bit of the running back we thought he was. 2017, 27-23 Auburn. Arguably the most frustrating one for the Tigers in the Gus Malzahn era, but also during this streak. Auburn had a 20-0 lead in the second quarter and would only go on to score 3 more points the entire rest of the game. LSU would complete the comeback with 27 points to get the win and keep their streak going, which meant that Auburn would officially see 2 decades of losses at LSU, hoping to end it on the anniversary of the next season. Now that brings us to 2019, where it looked all but hopeless for the Auburn Tigers to end the streak in Baton Rouge, because this is the year of number 1 LSU led by eventual Heisman quarterback Joe Burrow, who had been annihilating everyone all year. And some people still to this day are arguing whether he was the greatest college quarterback, if not the greatest college athlete of all time. Arguably, this is one of the best games, close with the 2017 game of Auburn to end the streak. The shocking thing about this was Auburn was the only team to keep LSU's offense in check, only allowing 23 points on the game, which by most people's standards sounds like a moderate defensive stand, but for that year, that was good to hold LSU to 23 points. Even through all their efforts, Auburn could not muster out the win, albeit walked away with the respect of LSU and the rest of the college football world for what they did against the eventual national champions. So there you have it. That is the history of Auburn versus LSU in Baton Rouge. 2 decades of losses, over 2 decades of losses. Now I want to hear from you in the comments section below. And let me just go ahead and say it right here. There's a contingency of Auburn fans out there. We understand that you did not like us. So let's just go ahead and let me just say that for you. We understand that. Let's not get into that. But I just want to know which of these games was the most heartbreaking for you during this time frame. There's a lot of options for you to work with during this time. Let's keep that conversation going down there in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this type of content, please help support it by smashing that like button. If you want more content from us, be sure to hit the subscribe along with the notification bell so you never miss an upload or a live stream. There are also other ways to help support our content that you can find linked in the description. One of those ways is being a channel member. All you gotta do is hit that join button, or like I said, check out the link in the description, but check all those ways out down there. Thank you for tuning into the E2C Network, where the Auburn family speaks. War Eagle.